Chicago, January 1950. Federal prosecutors had spent almost 2 years building their case. Their argument was simple. Preston Tucker was a con man. The Tucker 48 was never a real car. It was a promotional fraud, a slick brochure stapled to investor money that Tucker had no intention of spending on an actual automobile. So Tucker's defense did something. Every single morning of that trial, Tucker automobiles were driven to the Dirksen Federal Courthouse and parked where the jury walked in. Not models, not mock-ups, running cars, 6 cylinders, rear-mounted, turning over under their own power. The government argued those cars didn't exist. The jury could see them from the courthouse steps. On January 22, 1950, the jury returned their verdict. Not guilty. All 31 counts. Every charge the federal government had filed, dismissed. Tucker won in court. His factory was already dark by then, his company already dead, and the paper trail of who did it, how they did it, and why nobody was ever charged for it. That's what this investigation is actually about. To understand why powerful people wanted Tucker gone, you have to understand what he was building. In 1947, American car safety was essentially non-existent. Fuel tanks sat near the front of the car, close to the engine, above your legs. Dashboards were bare steel, windshields were fixed glass, steering columns were solid metal rods aimed directly at the driver's chest. The Big Three knew all of this. They built cars that way anyway because nobody was making them do otherwise. Tucker's car was different in ways that shouldn't have been possible for a startup in 1947. The Tucker 48 had a padded dashboard, soft material over a steel subframe designed to absorb impact instead of transferring it to your skull. That feature wouldn't become a federal mandate for another 21 years. The windshield was engineered to pop free of its frame on impact, clearing the opening before an occupant's head could reach it. The car sat low, with a wide stance and a center of gravity deliberately designed to reduce rollover. The center headlight, which Tucker called the Cyclops Eye, was mounted on a pivot and turned with the steering wheel, so your headlights followed the road through corners. Several states banned it immediately because their traffic codes had no rule for a headlight that moved. The engine was a modified Franklin 0335 aviation flat-eggs, 334 cubic inches, originally designed for Bell helicopters, reworked by Tucker's engineering team for road use. Rear-mounted over the drive wheels with 166 horsepower. Not fast by today's standards, sophisticated by 1947 standards, Tucker's original press materials promised disc brakes. The production cars used modified cord drum brakes instead, a specification change made during development. The prosecution would later waive that gap at the jury as evidence of fraud. But changing a spec during development is what engineering looks like. Ford changed the Mustang's specifications 14 times between concept and production. Nobody in Washington called Iacocca a criminal for it. Tucker didn't set up in a garage. He leased the Dodge Chicago plant at 7401 South Cicero Avenue, 475 acres under a single roof, the largest manufacturing facility in the world at the time, built during the war to produce Dodge aircraft engines for B-29 bombers. Tucker acquired the lease through the War Assets Administration for approximately $5 million. The government had spent over $175 million to build it. He was standing up a full-scale automobile factory in the geographic and political backyard of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler, with a product that made their dashboards, their windshields, and their safety records look like a deliberate choice to harm people. Cars were coming off the line by late 1948. Not many, but real ones. That's exactly when Michigan Senator Homer Ferguson got interested. Ferguson chaired the Senate War Investigating Committee, and his political base was Michigan. His documented relationships ran through the state's industrial establishment. His committee opened an inquiry into how Tucker had obtained and used the Chicago plant and investor funds. The findings went to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC opened a formal investigation. The indictment landed in June 1948, right in the middle of Tucker's production ramp-up. Not before he started, not after he'd finished. During, when stopping operations would destroy the company's momentum with no path back. That timing isn't coincidence by itself, but it's the first piece of evidence. And in forensic investigation, you don't ignore the timing. Here's the name that doesn't get mentioned enough: John Bugis. Before joining Ford Motor Company as head of industrial security, Bugis was the FBI's special agent in charge of the Detroit field office. He knew how federal investigations worked. He knew the investigators. He had relationships inside the agencies that were now looking at Tucker. Research documented in Steve Leto's 2016 book, the most thoroughly sourced account of the Tucker case, shows Bugis was in correspondence with SEC officials during the Tucker inquiry. Ford's head of security communicating with federal investigators, while those investigators were building a case against Ford's most threatening new competitor. Bugis was never subpoenaed, never deposed, never asked to explain that correspondence in court. Tucker's attorneys raised the conflict at trial. The jury heard it. The jury still acquitted. Here's the part of the trial that almost never gets reported. The prosecution's case rested heavily on testimony from former Tucker business associate Otis Radford, who testified about financial mismanagement inside Tucker Corporation. Radford was the government's attempt to show Tucker had misused investor funds. The defense countered by establishing that Radford himself had financial interests adverse to Tucker, that his testimony had a motive attached to it. And then, separately, evidence emerged during trial that Tucker Corporation stock had been shorted before the SEC investigation became public knowledge. Someone had sold shares they didn't own, betting Tucker's price would fall in a window when the only people who knew a federal investigation was coming were the investigators themselves and whoever they'd been talking to. The judge noted it. The defense raised it. It's in the trial record. Who held those short positions was never established with certainty, but the forensic logic is straightforward. The list of people with advanced knowledge of a non-public SEC investigation is very short, and the list of people who shorted Tucker stock in that window overlaps with the list of people who had everything to gain from Tucker's failure. Nobody was charged. Nobody was even seriously investigated for it. Preston Tucker died on December 26, 1956. Lung cancer. He was 53 years old. He never built another car. He spent his last years trying to. Of the 51 Tucker, 48 S produced, 47 are confirmed to survive today. That survival rate is extraordinary. Production Chevrolets and Fords from 1948 survive at under 5%. The Tuckers survived because their owners understood what they were holding. Physical evidence in a case that never fully closed. In 2023, Tucker chassis number 1044 sold at Barrett-Jackson for $2.9 million. The federal government argued in open court that these cars were fraudulent. The market is now pricing them at nearly $3 million each. The jury acquitted Tucker on every count. The engineering record shows a padded dashboard, a pop-out windshield, and a center steering headlight, 3 safety features that are standard equipment on every car built today, on a vehicle the government spent 2 years arguing was never real. The financial record shows someone profiting from advanced knowledge of a non-public federal investigation. The political record shows a Michigan senator with documented industry ties directing federal scrutiny at Tucker's production line at the moment it would cause maximum damage. The corporate record shows Ford's own security chief in contact with the investigators running that scrutiny. None of that rises to proof of conspiracy in a legal sense. Proof requires charges and convictions. There were none. But here's what the evidence actually shows. Tucker didn't fail because his car was bad. He didn't fail because he committed fraud. A jury said so. He failed because the people with the most to lose, if he succeeded, had the connections to make sure he ran out of time before the market could decide. He proved them wrong in a courtroom with the cars parked outside. It just didn't matter by then. The factory was already gone.